The hegemony's third strategic intelligence division had a saying: if it walks like a primitive, talks like a primitive, and builds mining equipment out of salvaged asteroid debris, it's probably going to surrender without firing a shot. This philosophy had served them remarkably well across 17 different star systems, 43 minor civilizations, and one particularly memorable incident involving a species that had somehow convinced themselves that waving white flags made them invisible to orbital bombardment. Humans, according to the latest xenological assessment, ranked somewhere between adorably backward and charmingly optimistic on the hegemony's threat assessment scale. The fact that this scale only went up to mildly inconvenient should have been the first red flag, but the hegemony had never been particularly gifted at introspection. Admiral Vexthak of the Crimson Talon Battle Group reviewed the reconnaissance data with the sort of professional detachment typically reserved for grocery shopping lists. The human mining outpost designated as Target Acquisition Epsilon 7 appeared to be exactly what their long-range scouts had reported: a collection of prefabricated structures, some mining equipment that looked like it had been assembled by enthusiastic children, and approximately 37 human personnel going about their daily routines with the blissful ignorance of prey animals who had never encountered a predator. "Fascinating," muttered the Admiral's tactical advisor, a 7-foot-tall insectoid whose species had evolved from particularly aggressive beetles. "They appear to have no orbital defenses, no military installations, and their communications array couldn't punch through a solar storm if it tried. Are we certain they're not a nature preserve?" The Admiral's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. "Intelligence confirms they're a legitimate mining operation. Apparently they're extracting some sort of rare mineral used in their primitive manufacturing process. The humans call it," he consulted his datapad, "titanium." A collective chittering arose from the bridge crew, which was the hegemony equivalent of polite laughter. Titanium was so common in civilized space that most species used it for children's toys. "Sir," piped up the communications officer, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone trying very hard not to sound condescending. "The xenobiology team has identified what appears to be some sort of domesticated creature living among the humans. Initial scans suggest it's roughly the size of a small shuttle, but appears to spend most of its time sleeping or playing with the human children." The Admiral's compound eyes focused on the surveillance footage being transmitted to his personal display. Sure enough, there it was, a massive, four-legged creature with dark fur and an impressive set of teeth, currently engaged in what appeared to be some sort of recreational activity with several young humans. The beast seemed remarkably docile, allowing the tiny humans to climb all over it while it lay sprawled in the artificial sunlight of the mining facility's central courtyard. "How delightfully primitive," observed the Admiral. "They've managed to domesticate their local fauna, rather like keeping a particularly large farm animal, I suppose." The tactical advisor leaned forward, studying the creature with professional interest. "It appears to be some sort of carnivore, based on the dental structure, but clearly they've managed to breed the aggression out of it. Look how gently it interacts with their young. Quite touching, really." What the hegemony's sophisticated sensors failed to detect, of course, was the subtle way the creature's ears tracked every sound in its environment, how its seemingly sleepy eyes never quite closed all the way, or the fact that what they had interpreted as playful interaction was actually a highly regimented training exercise disguised as recreation. The Admiral closed the surveillance feed and turned his attention to the tactical display. The human outpost was positioned on a small moon orbiting a gas giant in an unremarkable system that barely registered on most star charts. The moon had a breathable atmosphere, reasonable gravity, and absolutely no strategic value whatsoever beyond the minerals buried in its crust. "Standard pacification protocols then," he announced, settling back into his command chair with the satisfaction of someone who had just solved a particularly simple puzzle. "Orbital insertion, establish a perimeter, inform the humans that their mining rights have been transferred to the hegemony, and relocate them to a suitable agricultural world where they can continue their quaint existence under proper supervision." The fleet consisted of 12 heavy cruisers, 46 assault transports, and enough ground forces to conquer a small continent. It was, by any reasonable measure, massive overkill for subduing a mining outpost populated by 36 humans and their oversized pets. "Estimated time to complete pacification?" inquired the Admiral, already composing his victory report in his head. 6 hours, sir," Assuming they don't surrender immediately upon seeing our ships, replied the tactical advisor. The only potential complication is what to do with their domesticated animal. Our xenobiologists are quite excited about studying it. Admiral Vexthek nodded approvingly. Another successful campaign for the hegemony, another minor species brought under the protective wing of galactic civilization, and perhaps even an interesting specimen for the xenobiology department. The fact that the creature in question was currently lying on its back while human children rubbed its belly only reinforced how utterly harmless the entire situation appeared to be. As the hegemony fleet began its final approach to the mining outpost, confidence radiating from every weapon system and assault craft, none of the highly trained military professionals aboard bothered to question why a domesticated pet would need to be quite so large, quite so heavily muscled, or quite so obviously designed by evolution to be an apex predator. After all, if humans had managed to domesticate it, how dangerous could it possibly be? The morning routine at Mining Station Echo 7 proceeded with the sort of comfortable predictability that came from humans doing what humans did best, making the impossible look routine. The shift supervisor emerged from the communications hub with a steaming mug of something that the hegemony's chemical analysis would have classified as mildly toxic stimulant beverage, while the chief engineer was already knee-deep in the daily ritual of coaxing machinery to work despite having been designed by the lowest bidder 3-star systems away. What the orbiting surveillance platforms interpreted as quaint domesticity was actually a precision operation that would have impressed a military logistics coordinator. Each human moved through their assigned tasks with the efficiency of a species that had learned to thrive in environments specifically designed to kill them, while their pet maintained what any reasonable observer would recognize as a patrol pattern. The creature in question, though calling it a creature was rather like calling a supernova a bright light, had positioned itself in the central courtyard where it could observe all approaches to the facility. Its massive head rested on paws the size of dinner table, ears that could track a whisper from half a kilometer away twitching at every sound, while eyes that missed absolutely nothing surveyed its domain with the casual alertness of something that had never encountered a predator because it was the predator. The hegemony's xenobiologists, bless their academic hearts, had spent considerable time analyzing the beast's behavior patterns, and had concluded that it was remarkably well trained and surprisingly intelligent for a domesticated animal. They had noted its apparent ability to distinguish between different humans, its protective behavior around the younger personnel, and its obvious comfort in the facility's environment. What they had somehow failed to notice was that the creature's comfort stemmed from the fact that it had personally selected every single defensive position in the outpost, had memorized the exact acoustic signature of every piece of equipment, and knew the precise location of every potential threat within a radius that would have made a military strategist weep with envy. The morning's playtime began when the youngest member of the mining crew, barely out of her teens and possessed of the sort of fearless optimism that convinced humans they could colonize gas giant moons, approached the resting giant with what appeared to be a simple exercise routine. Combat training disguised as recreation would have been the accurate description, but the hegemony's observers saw only a young human performing what looked like an elaborate dance around a patient animal, who occasionally shifted position to provide better playing opportunity. The beast moved with the fluid grace of something that weighed 3 tons but could accelerate from rest to lethal velocity faster than most species could blink. Each playful movement was actually a demonstration of combat techniques that had been refined over thousands of years of evolutionary warfare, while the human's responses showcased reflexes that had been honed by growing up in partnership with something that could accidentally kill her if it sneezed too enthusiastically. "Good morning, beautiful," the young engineer murmured, running her hands through fur that the hegemony's sensors had identified as surprisingly coarse but had failed to recognize as specifically evolved to turn bladed weapons. The creature's response was a rumbling vocalization that the alien's translation protocols interpreted as contentment noise rather than acknowledgement of readiness status. The mining supervisor joined them, carrying what appeared to be the creature's breakfast, several hundred pounds of synthesized protein that the facility's reprocessing units had carefully formulated to meet the nutritional requirements of something that had evolved to hunt prey roughly the size of shuttlecraft. "Any word from the orbital survey team?" she asked, though her attention remained focused on watching their companion methodically consume enough food to feed a small village. "Nothing yet," replied the communications officer from across the courtyard. "They're supposed to check in every 12 hours, but you know how it is with deep space surveys. Probably found something shiny and forgot to call home." What they didn't know, of course, was that their orbital survey team had been the first casualties of the hegemony's advanced scouts, their small research vessel having been intercepted and boarded before they could send so much as a distress signal. The aliens had considered this a masterpiece of tactical planning, eliminating any possibility of early warning while maintaining complete operational security. The creature's head lifted slightly, ears rotating toward the sky with the sort of focused attention that would have sent every prey animal within 50 kilometers sprinting for cover. Something in its posture shifted, a subtle change that transformed it from large domestic animal to apex predator evaluating threat parameters. The humans noticed immediately because humans who had survived long enough to establish successful mining operations in hostile environments tended to be very good at reading the body language of things that could kill them. The youngest engineer's hand moved to rest on the creature's shoulder, a gesture that looked affectionate but was actually checking muscle tension and breathing patterns. "What is it?" asked the supervisor, her voice carrying the sort of casual alertness that came from working in an environment where unusual behavior could mean anything from equipment failure to imminent death. The creature's response was a low vocalization that vibrated through the ground beneath their feet, a sound that the hegemony's audio analysis would later classify as subsonic communication if they had lived long enough to analyze anything. Above them, invisible to human eyes but crystal clear to senses that had evolved to detect the electromagnetic signatures of approaching threats, the hegemony fleet continued its final approach. 12 heavy cruisers, 46 assault transports, and enough firepower to crack a small moon, all converging on what their intelligence had assured them was a defenseless mining outpost with no military capability. The communications officer's equipment chose that moment to emit a soft chime indicating incoming traffic, followed immediately by the sort of static that suggested their orbital relay had stopped functioning entirely. In the grand scheme of cosmic irony, this was the hegemony's second tactical masterstroke, cutting off all external communications to prevent any call for help. What they had accomplished, of course, was activating every single defensive protocol that had been programmed into 3 tons of perfectly evolved killing machine over the past several years of what humans like to call domestication. The creature rose to its feet with the sort of fluid motion that made it clear that its previous resting position had been about as restful as a coiled spring. Every human in the facility felt the vibration through the ground, a sensation that triggered responses that had been drilled into them through countless hours of what the hegemony would have called recreational activity. The morning routine at Mining Station Echo 7 was about to become significantly more interesting.
The hegemony's tactical doctrine had been refined across centuries of successful campaigns, built upon the fundamental principle that overwhelming force applied with precise timing would break any species' will to resist before they could mount an effective defense. It was a sound strategy that had worked flawlessly against 43 different civilizations, and Admiral Vexthax saw no reason why humans would prove any different. The first wave of assault transports descended through the atmosphere with textbook precision, their hulls gleaming in the pale morning light as they established a perfect perimeter around the mining facility. Each craft deployed exactly according to protocol, force fields activated, troops disembarking in formation, and heavy weapons platforms positioning themselves to provide overlapping fields of fire that could suppress any resistance before it began. "Beautiful execution," observed the tactical advisor, watching the deployment unfold on the command display. "The humans haven't even activated their emergency broadcasts yet, probably too shocked by our arrival to mount any coherent response." What the hegemony's sensors interpreted as shocked paralysis was actually the sort of calm efficiency that came from a species that had spent several millennia learning how to react when things tried to kill them. The mining crew had moved to their assigned positions with practiced ease, sealing blast doors and activating defensive systems that the aliens' preliminary scans had somehow failed to detect. The creature had moved as well, though its change in position appeared so natural that the orbital observers initially missed it entirely. One moment it had been standing in the central courtyard, the next it had somehow relocated itself to a position where it could observe the landing zones while remaining concealed behind what appeared to be a decorative rock formation. "Sir," reported the communications officer from the lead assault transport, "we're receiving a response from the human facility. They're requesting identification and stating that this system is under the protection of something called the Terran Colonial Defense Initiative." Admiral Vexthax's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Inform them that their Colonial Defense Initiative is about to become a historical footnote.
Deploy the standard pacification protocol and begin relocation preparations for the civilian population. The hegemony's standard pacification protocol involved a carefully choreographed display of overwhelming force designed to convince any reasonable species that resistance was futile. Energy weapons discharged into the sky in impressive but harmless light shows, heavy assault mechs stomped around making intimidating noises, and loudspeakers broadcast surrender demands in 17 different languages. It was quite a production really, and had never failed to achieve the desired psychological effect within the first 10 minutes of deployment. Unfortunately for the hegemony, the psychological effect it achieved this time was not quite what they had intended. The creature's reaction to several hundred armed aliens surrounding its territory while making loud noises and firing weapons was immediate, instinctive, and absolutely catastrophic for everyone who wasn't human. 3 tons of apex predator launched itself from concealment with the sort of acceleration that suggested evolution had spent considerable time optimizing its design for converting potential energy into violence. The first assault mech never saw it coming. One moment the pilot was broadcasting surrender demands through his external speakers. The next moment his 12-foot-tall armored war machine was airborne, spinning end over end through the thin atmosphere before impacting the ground with enough force to create a small crater. "What just happened?" demanded the Admiral, staring at his tactical display where one of his assault units had just stopped transmitting entirely. "Unknown, sir," replied the tactical advisor, though his voice had acquired the sort of uncertainty that came from watching impossible things happen in real time. "It appears something struck Assault Unit 7 with sufficient force to launch it approximately 300 meters. The creature's next target was the heavy weapons platform that had been positioned to provide covering fire for the ground troops. The hegemony's engineers had designed it to withstand direct hits from orbital bombardment, and its armor plating could deflect anything short of a tactical nuclear weapon. Apparently nobody had thought to test it against something that combined the bite force of an industrial crusher with the targeting instincts of a guided missile. The platform's destruction was accompanied by a sound that the Admiral's audio technicians would later describe as metallurgical screaming, though by that point there wouldn't be any audio technicians left to describe anything. "Sir, we're receiving multiple distress signals from the ground units," reported the communications officer, her professional calm beginning to show cracks. "They're requesting immediate aerial support and medical evacuation for casualties involving what they describe as catastrophic blunt force trauma combined with evidence of large-scale predation." The Admiral's compound eyes focused on the tactical display, where the neat geometric patterns of his deployment were rapidly dissolving into chaos. Unit markers were winking out of existence with alarming frequency, while the remaining forces seemed to be abandoning their positions and retreating toward their landing craft. "Impossible," he muttered, though his conviction was beginning to waver. "Deploy the reserve units and establish a wider perimeter. Whatever local predator they've encountered, it can't possibly stand against coordinated military fire." The reserve deployment lasted approximately 4 minutes, which was longer than the Admiral had expected but considerably shorter than military doctrine suggested was necessary for establishing tactical superiority over indigenous fauna. The creature had apparently decided that the time for subtle approach was over. What followed could only be described as a masterclass in applied violence that would have impressed military strategists across the galaxy, assuming any of them had survived to witness it. The beast moved through the hegemony's carefully planned assault formation like a natural disaster with teeth, demonstrating the sort of tactical awareness that suggested it had been studying their deployment patterns and finding them inadequate. It struck from unexpected angles, disappeared into terrain that should have provided no concealment, and displayed an understanding of combined arms warfare that would have earned it a commission in most military organizations. "Admiral," came a transmission from one of the few surviving ground commanders, his voice carrying the sort of controlled panic that indicated someone was trying very hard not to scream. "We need immediate extraction. This isn't a domesticated animal, sir. I don't know what this is, but it's systematically dismantling our entire ground operation." The Admiral stared at his display, watching the final few markers of his assault force wink out of existence while the human mining facility remained completely intact. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice was suggesting that perhaps their intelligence assessment had contained a few minor inaccuracies. "Sir," whispered the tactical advisor, "should we consider orbital bombardment?" Admiral Vexthak looked at the tactical display, then at the surveillance feed showing the creature settling back into its previous position in the central courtyard, then at the complete absence of any hegemony ground forces capable of reporting their status. The morning's pacification operation had just become considerably more complicated. The final casualty report from Mining Station Echo 7 made for fascinating reading, assuming one had a particular fondness for military disasters and statistical impossibility. 12 heavy cruisers, intact but rapidly departing the system, 46 assault transports, 38 destroyed, 8 evacuated with skeleton crews, ground forces, 0% operational status, mission objectives achieved precisely. Time elapsed from initial assault to complete tactical failure, 14 minutes and 37 seconds, which established a new hegemony record for operational incompetence that would stand unchallenged for the remainder of the organization's considerably shortened existence. Admiral Vexthak sat in his command chair, staring at the tactical display with the expression of someone who had just watched the fundamental laws of physics submit a formal resignation. His remaining bridge crew moved with the careful precision of individuals who suspected they might be living through a career-ending event and were determined not to make it worse through sudden movements. "Intelligence assessment complete, sir," reported the tactical advisor, though his voice carried the hollow quality of someone reading from a script written in a language he didn't understand. "The creature appears to be what human databases classify as a Terran wolf, subspecies designation dire. Cross-referencing with xenobiology archives indicates this particular specimen is approximately 3 times larger than the baseline genetic template and has been enhanced through selective breeding programs." The Admiral's mandibles produced a clicking sound that might have been laughter if laughter could carry overtones of existential dread. "Enhanced. Yes, I suppose that's one word for it. Sir, there's more," continued the advisor, consulting his datapad with the sort of careful attention typically reserved for potentially explosive devices. "Further analysis of the human facility indicates the presence of defensive systems that our initial scans somehow failed to detect: energy shield generators, automated weapon platforms, and what appears to be a communications array capable of contacting the Terran Colonial Defense Fleet." "How long until that fleet arrives?" asked the Admiral, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Best estimate suggests we have approximately 6 hours before the first Terran vessels reach this system, sir. However, given recent events, our intelligence estimates may require some revision." Down on the surface of the moon, the mining crew had emerged from their defensive positions and were conducting the sort of casual post-crisis routine that spoke to considerable experience with violent interruptions to their daily schedule. The facility's automated systems were already beginning repairs to the minor damage caused by falling hegemony equipment, while the crew members checked on each other with the practiced efficiency of people who had been through this sort of excitement before. The creature had returned to its preferred resting spot in the central courtyard, where it was now engaged in what appeared to be a thorough grooming session. The hegemony's remaining surveillance platforms captured every detail of the beast, methodically cleaning debris from its fur, a process that revealed the unmistakable remnants of advanced military armor and several components that had once belonged to assault mechs. "Fascinating," murmured the xenobiology specialist, studying the footage with academic detachment. "It appears to have consumed portions of our equipment. The metallurgical analysis suggests it can process refined alloys as part of its normal digestive cycle." The Admiral closed his eyes and wondered if early retirement was still an option for officers who had just lost an entire invasion force to what the humans apparently considered a household pet. "Sir, incoming transmission from Hegemony Command," announced the communications officer. "They're requesting a status report on the pacification operation. Tell them the operation has been postponed pending further intelligence gathering," replied the Admiral. He paused, then added, "Also inform them that our threat assessment protocols may need substantial revision, particularly the sections dealing with human domestic animals." The transmission that eventually reached Hegemony Command included several attachments that would fundamentally alter the organization's approach to human contact. Video footage of a domesticated creature dismantling military equipment with the sort of casual efficiency typically associated with industrial machinery. Audio recordings of what human databases classified as protective vocalizations but which sounded remarkably similar to the hunting calls of apex predators. And a complete tactical analysis that concluded with the recommendation that all future operations involving human territories be classified as maximum threat regardless of apparent civilian status. 3 days later, when the mining crew's transport returned from their supply run to find the facility completely intact and their companion lounging peacefully in the morning sun,
The crew chief asked the question that had been bothering him since reviewing the security footage. How many of them were there? The youngest engineer, who had been scratching behind the creature's ears while reviewing the tactical data, looked up with the sort of innocent expression that suggested the question wasn't as simple as it seemed. Oh, there were hundreds of them, she replied cheerfully. Came down in those big ships, made a lot of noise, shot up the sky for a while. You know how it is. And now, the creature opened one eye and regarded the crew chief with the sort of patient attention typically reserved for particularly slow students. Its tail thumped once against the ground, a sound that carried undertones of satisfaction. Well, said the engineer, returning her attention to the behind-ear scratching that produced a rumbling vocalization of contentment. Now there aren't. The hegemony's files on human domestic animals underwent extensive revision following the Echo 7. The new classification system included detailed warnings about the tendency of humans to form partnerships with creatures that other species might reasonably classify as mobile extinction events. Additional notes emphasized that human terms like pet, companion, and good boy should not be interpreted as indicators of reduced lethality. Most importantly, the revised protocols included a strongly worded recommendation that any species encountering humans should pay very careful attention to their domestic animals, particularly the large furry ones with impressive teeth who seemed to enjoy playing with human children. Because if there was one thing the galaxy had learned from the Echo 7 incident, it was that human ideas about domestication were considerably more flexible than most species had previously assumed. And when humans went to the trouble of domesticating something that could dismantle a military invasion in under 15 minutes, it was probably wise to assume they had their reasons. The creature in the courtyard stretched, yawned to display teeth that could puncture starship hull plating, and settled back into its favorite napping position. After all, the humans would be returning from their evening shift soon, and someone had to keep watch over the facility. Just in case any more visitors decided to drop by unannounced,